We are apparently live.
That's the rumor. That's what it says on the top of my screen. It says live.
That is the rumor. I have opened the chat. I'll just message everybody. Everyone, if you've joined us, please give us a little message if you are here and can hear and see us. Well, to get through, a little bit of a lag. I think there's 30-second lag. Joy of technology. We're still at the mercy of it.
It's going to get worse.
Yeah. Oh, I should have got a whiskey, not water.
There you
It's going to
go.
be
What time is it in Paris?
what?
It's 9 o'clock
It's
at night?
9 p.m. Yes.
Right.
Okay. It's gone through. I might just have a look at my phone, YouTube, to see if we are live. I'll just come off of the Wi-Fi. Yeah, it looks like we are live. There's
Yay.
5 people watching so far. Hi, everybody. This is on YouTube. We have 5 watching. Do drop us a little hello if you're there. But we will kick off. Right. Let's get started, shall we? Because we've got a lot to get through.
Let's do it.
So let's do it. So hi everyone, I'm Hayley Miller. I'm the founder of World VFX Day. Thank you so much for joining. This is my first live session using a new software, and I don't have Hugo to help me this time like I usually do. So hopefully everything's looking great. I'm very, very happy to have Scott Ross with me today. Hi, Scott.
Hi there.
For the benefit of any viewers, I'm sure everyone does know you. That's why they're
Not
here.
everyone, though.
I just wanted to give you a quick intro. Before that, just a little bit of admin. So if you're on YouTube and anything goes wrong for some reason, we are supposed to be live on LinkedIn as well. So head over there, and vice versa. If you're on LinkedIn, head over to YouTube if anything goes awry. We are at the mercy of the internet gods. This is an Ask Me Anything style interview, so please do drop your questions in for Scott. He has said that he will answer anything, so
That I will.
please don't be shy. We're going to run for about an hour, but depending on how many questions we get through or how many we get from the audience, we can run over a little bit. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So Scott has been in the VFX business since the 80s, leading companies such as ILM, Lucasfilm, and then co-founding and running Digital Domain for around 14 years.
Correct.
Since 2006, Scott has been advising multiple companies across education, events, tech, and most recently for digital studios. Scott, you obviously have a very impressive career, and now it's all nicely wrapped up in your book Upstart, which came out at the end of last year. And I'm not just saying that, but I really did enjoy it, and it answered a lot of questions for me, having worked in the industry for about 7 years now. So thank you for that. I
You're
liked
welcome.
that it was also a bit of a personal memoir as well, and we'll get into that a bit later. Um, I really, there was a lot of things in the book that interested me, but one big thing stood out, and I hope we can dig into a bit deeper, and that is the possibility of a trade association. It's something that you identified a while ago that the industry could really benefit from. Could you tell us a bit about how that idea came around and what happened next?
Well, first, if I could, it probably would be beneficial to for me to underscore what I think the malady in the visual effects industry is. What's the real problem? What's the base issue that the industry faces and has faced, at least for the last 40 years that I've been involved with it? And while there are complex issues around it, it's as simple as the business model sucks. We're asked to do things oftentimes that we've never seen or done before. We're asked to do it in a period of time which at times gets pushed around, deliver early, deliver late, because material might not be ready or the studio decides to change its release date. And we're doing the best we can when we come up with a bid to understand what the director wants and what the studio wants. And then we're played by the studio, the client, against the other visual effects companies that also need the work. And lo and behold, we wind up with a bid on something that we're not sure that we can actually do, and we're bare bonesing it because the competition has been so fierce. And so the problem at the end of the day is we have a fixed contract entering into doing something absolutely miraculous that nobody's ever seen before in a time frame that we're a little bit edgy about and with a fixed contract price. And that spells disaster. And that's why we've seen so many visual effects companies go out of business. And that's why the industry is so difficult. So I came upon that understanding when I first got to Industrial Light and Magic back in the mid to late 1980s. And I realized that because the competition was so fierce, that a lot of the bigger visual effects companies back then, there were only probably five, were not talking to one another, and they had severe competition issues, and we can get into that in a little bit. But as a result, there was no organization that spoke for the industry. I looked around. I came from video post production back in the late 70s, early 80s, and there was an association called the Association of Independent Commercial Producers, the AICP, which was a trade organization for all the commercial production companies. And as a result, the AICP really took the issues that were at hand with commercial productions and brought it to the advertising agency, also who had a trade association called the Triple A, I think it was, or the Quadruple A. And I watched the AICP solve a lot of the issues that the commercial production business had. So when I got to ILM, I looked around for a trade association because I couldn't quite fathom nor see the light of day given the business model. And there was no trade association. Not only was there no trade association, it seemed like all of the major companies, again, five of them, had real issues with each other. So the opportunity to get them together and have a conversation and understand that we're all in this together and we're not the enemy, the issues really are the studios and how our business model works. And so I tried to start an industry association back, I think it was probably in 1990, And I called on my, because now you're in Paris, Haley, I called on my French sensibilities, my grade school French, and I came up with the acronym AVEC, AVEC, which means with in French, and it stood for the Association of Visual Effects Creators. And I called a meeting, and I was finally able to get, the four or five major companies together, and we had it at DreamQuest down in Simi Valley. And unfortunately, I was called into a senior executive meeting with Lucasfilm, and I couldn't go. And I wound up sending my brand new head of visual effects production for my features group. And he went down and came back and showed me a piece of paper, which was all of the names and addresses and emails, I believe emails, of all of the employees at DreamQuest Images. And I flipped out. I said, this is exactly what we should not be doing. Let's tear this thing up. Let's tell Hoyt Yateman, who was the president of DreamQuest at the time, that this happened. And once that word got out, all of a sudden, the concept of a trade association just fell apart because it played on the paranoia of all of the other players thinking that um, we were the enemy and they were the enemy, et cetera. And so it fell apart, and it stayed that way for a number of years. And then later on, when I got to Digital Domain and I started Digital Domain, I was approached by a fellow by the name of Tom Atkin, and he talked about putting this new organization together called the Visual Effects Society. And I was really excited about it. And I wound up being a founding member, sat on the board, um, gave a boatload of money to it, on ultimately to find out that the Visual Effects Society was basically a group of people that were interested in talking about technology and talking about the art of visual effects, and having a party and giving awards. And they were not willing to, because they said it was not in their charter, they were not willing to address the real concerns. Because as I always said, if you don't have blood in the body, which is money, the body dies. And you could be talking about all of these awards and this wonderful technology and the uncanny valley and all of those things. But the uncanniest valley is when everybody is laid off because there's no money. And so I was really upset with the Visual Effects Society and took them to task, but it fell on deaf ears. And I wound up sort of being a persona non grata to the VES and have remained so ever since.
Mm, thank you for that. I'm sorry if I cut out during that. I am at the mercy of the hotel Wi-Fi.
Haley, by the
Um,
way, is in a kitchen in the hotel because the Wi-Fi in her hotel room is bad. So if you see like kitchen help in the background and making souffles, she's not a chef.
yeah, I do apologize, everyone. I was assured that it had amazing Wi-Fi. So if I am lost forever, Scott, please just continue
Can
without me.
All right,
Um,
carry on.
so yeah, thank you for all of that. So you may have covered this while I was frantic and offline. So I know it's probably not a small endeavor, and the same reasons why it didn't happen before are probably the same as today. Mainly, I would say that studios probably a little bit don't want to annoy clients, basically. I mean, there were less studios around when you initially had this idea. Do you think it would be more difficult now or easier given the amount of studios there are? There's over 600 worldwide. Do you think we have that strength in numbers now?
I'm concerned that we might have. I'm going to take this off so I could hear myself. I'm concerned that we might have gone past the point at which we might be able to do something given a trade association, because my thought back then, and then again, I tried in the early 2000s as well. My thought back then was that if we looked at feature films and we looked at things like Marvel Universe or whatever, the number of visual effects shots in any film was extraordinary. For example, back at Terminator 2 times, I think we had 48 visual effects shots in a movie, and we thought, wow, that's a lot. Now it's, it's 400 or 1,000. So my thought was that if we got the major visual effects facilities together to join this trade association, we'd have the leverage to be able to say to the studios, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And we're not going to bid the way we have in the past. There's going to be a new business model. Now, again, there's no issues of price fixing or any of that because we're not talking about pricing. We're just talking about how we get paid, the model in which we get paid, which would no longer, in my opinion, be a fixed fee contract. We should get paid in the same way that production gets paid. So
Mm,
now we fast forward to 2025, and as we look around, several of the major visual effects companies are now owned by motion picture studios. So ILM's owned by Disney, and Scanline's owned by Netflix, and they're the ability to have the leverage that we had back in the aughts in 2000, 2004, 2005, I think might have been diluted considerably. So if we want to change the business model, we're going to need the major players to be involved to make sure that the studios can't end run us. But unfortunately,
mm,
now the studios own several of the big facilities. Now, I've been around long enough to see studios having owned facilities in the past. And at some point, studios start to realize that this visual effects business is a money losing business. And why not take the issues regarding visual effects and the cost of it all and place it on an outside company like Digital Domain used to be. And so at some point that might change again. And if it does, I hope the industry jumps on the possibility of putting an international trade association in place.
yeah, I hope so too. What type of organization do you think could lead the way? I mean, obviously, you need some good legal representation.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I thought VES was like the perfect uh, opportunity to be able to put a trade association together in because they have all of these members. Now they're like 20 or some odd years old, and they have funding, and uh, and one could hire legal representation, and they have an oversight committee of really qualified people in the field in the industry. But VES continues to say, no mas, no, not interested. We're not interested in doing this. So I guess if it was to happen, I wouldn't be part of it. This trade association would have to raise a bunch of money, and probably in the neighborhood of 250,000 and hire the appropriate legal people, hire the appropriate press relations people, marketing people, and the executive staff that would oversee it.
Mm, yeah, so a lot involved.
I thought I had a
Um,
shot, by the way, back in the early, like I think it was 2000 and must have been like 2009 or 2010. I was trying to reinvigorate it again, and a lot of the fears at the time by the major facilities was that we could be brought up on price fixing because it was on the heels of that legal issue that included, I think it was Disney and Pixar, et cetera, for trying to withhold raises and salaries on bidding of employees. It was a big lawsuit. And I wanted to waylay the fears that this was nothing like that, that this was legal. So we had our meeting at a major law firm in Los Angeles. A bunch of people joined, even people like Weta from New Zealand joined the call. But when all was said and done, they all backed away and said, thank you, but no thank you.
um, Interesting. It's a shame because, like you say, pretty much every industry has a trade association.
Yeah, I mean, the soft drink industry has a the pornography industry has a trade association. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's a no-brainer. And in fact, we could talk about the union situation. The union situation, in my opinion, should come after the trade association because if the union situation takes place before the trade association, and more importantly, if a union is not truly international, it will wind up doing more harm to the union signatories than it will help. And so the visual effects worker needs to understand or get their head around the fact that the problem is really the business model and the clients. The problems are generally, from the management point of view, are just trying to keep their company alive, right?
Mm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, just allow me the fantasy for 1 second. Um, it has to start somewhere. If, say, like I said, we have over 600 studios, probably a little bit less at this moment in time, but that's a lot. If the majority of those, probably not ones that are part of a client right now, but if we had, say, 70% of the industry interested in making these changes, and the changes are the business model, particularly, do you think that's a good start? And we can have a voice to at
Yeah,
least bring it
I
to the
think that's a
table.
great. I think it's a great start, but it's really some serious heavy lifting, right?
Mm,
I was looking for the knockout punch. I figured if we could get Industrial Light and Magic, um, you know, uh, DNEG, Frame Store, Digital Domain at the time, Rhythm and Hues, if you could get like five of those companies to sign up, that the weight of all of that would have enough power to be able to make the studios go, well, I can't really go anywhere else for my 500 shots. And so, okay, if that's the way it's got to be, that's the way it's got to be. But that leverage, as I said, is probably gone. But if you put together, 50, 60% of 600 facilities, that might be able to push it over the brink. The issue is that that's a lot of heavy lifting to be able to sign
mm.
up, a whole bunch of industries, facilities. Let me get rid of this and turn my phone off.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's something that I've
Yeah.
been thinking about constantly since I listened to your
Alrighty.
book. So I am still very hopeful. So anyone watching,
I'm back with you.
please get in touch. Let's sound it out. Because I do totally agree with everything that you're saying. So if there is some magic formula. At the time, actually, while I think about it, MPAA, as it was known then, was around. It's been around since 1922, I think.
Yeah.
Did they get involved at all or speak to you?
Well, the
I know they
MPA,
represent studios.
yeah, the MPAA represents the enemy, you know,
Yeah.
and so the MPAA were doing whatever they could to try to scare and forestall any activities for a visual effects trade association.
Okay, so they did. All right, interesting. Okay,
I mean, let's
well,
look at the facts. If we look at a movie's budget right now, a big blockbuster international film, the largest number on the bid package is visual effects. Visual effects by is more expensive than most everything, maybe everything on a film's budget nowadays. So the studios are really happy with the way the business model works. The visual effects facility gets all of the responsibility and none of the authority. You get a fixed
mm,
price. It's sort of like you're going to build a house and you say to the general contractor, I'd like to build a house. And the general contractor says, okay, well, how many bedrooms? You say, oh, three bedrooms, two baths. They say, great, here's the price. Then all of a sudden, the client says, actually, five bedrooms and six bathrooms, and I'd like it to look like the Taj Mahal. And the contractor says, okay, here's a change order. And in the visual effects industry, you say, oh, you asked me to jump. I guess I got to figure out how high. So it's totally screwed up.
mm. Yep, I agree. So obviously we've seen a lot of closures recently, but also before then, before COVID as well. I've been making a little list. I think I've got about 50 on there at the moment from VFX, animation, and gaming. side. Were there in the last year, were there any particular announcements that surprised you more than others?
I'm sort of, in some ways, out of the industry, but I have
Mm,
some close friends that are still in senior positions. And I was somewhat aware of the problems that Technicolor was having.
mm,
And I wasn't as in tune as to holy crap, they're going to go bankrupt. But I did realize that they were trying to be sold and there were lots of problems and they were taking projects that they couldn't really deliver and they were in partly managed incorrectly as well. And then there was, corporate policy issues and all of that stuff. So I wasn't really shocked by Technicolor going out of business. I know a lot of people were, and the shocking thing for me, if there was anything shocking, was I had no idea how big they were and how many employees there were. I was on a
yeah,
conversation with an Indian facility, and I said, "Well, what would you say? There's probably like 2,000 Indian visual effects workers in India." And the person on the other end of this phone said, 2,000. That's the number of visual effects workers just working at Technicolor, right? So I didn't see the largesse of Technicolor, but I did see that there was some serious problems.
somewhere was it 10,000 total staff under
Yeah,
all the brands.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. And yeah, it's very alarming just to think about how many people are out of work right now. And we obviously see it on LinkedIn, but we can't really see the full extent. I'm sure a lot of people are struggling right now emotionally and financially.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. I'm going to ask this next question, but then I'm going to check because I don't know if anyone's sent any chat messages. I'm going to look on my phone to see. We are live, everyone. But whilst I do that, I just want to ask you, just coming back to your book, um, you said that you were advised initially to not add any personal stories into
Huh?
your book, just make it a business focused book. I'm really glad that you didn't listen because I think that it added a depth to the book that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And your story when you first started working at ILM was really great to me because I had the same feeling when I started in visual effects. I was just blown away by how complex everything was, but also fascinated. And to this day, I'm still learning so much. But I had that imposter syndrome, which is what a lot of people talk about in a lot of the talks that I do and the ones that I watch elsewhere. Is that something that you felt you had at the time? And did you have that throughout your career? Do you still have it now? How did you overcome it if you don't?
The concept of the imposter syndrome.
Yes, yeah.
So when I first got to ILM, it was beyond the imposter syndrome. It was, I have no idea what these men and women are doing. I mean, I came out of video post production where, you know, commercials and whatnot were shot on 35 millimeter celluloid. And then they were brought into a rank Centel on a flying spot scanner and transferred to videotape. And then they'd go into an editing room with a PCP 11750 computer running a CMX editing machine, a couple of 1 inch machines, and then you would edit it. And that was my understanding of how things work. Yeah, yes, I went to film school, but I went to film school in the late 60s, early 70s. And so we were blown away when we got an opportunity to get our hands on a Bolex 16 millimeter. Right. So when I got to ILM, everything was analog. There was nothing digital. Back at One Pass, we had Harrys and paint boxes and, telecines and all of the like. But when I got to ILM and it was right smack in the middle of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I had no clue as to what these folks were doing. So I just was enamored with the fact that I was working what I thought in the big leagues. I was now working with people that were doing film projects, and I didn't really understand the technology. And I felt like a duck out of water. So I just kept my mouth shut for a while and just like, where's the bathroom? you know, and so from being a little boy and being enamored with film and then going to film school, the concept of being able to live in the Bay Area and work at Lucasfilm, which was the premier film company in the entire Bay Area and right up there with maybe the premier film company in the world, was just, electrifying. I couldn't wait to go to work, and there was no imposter stuff because I wasn't really part of it yet. Then, as I moved up the corporate ladder and I became ILM's general manager and then ultimately senior vice president of many of the divisions, I was so embroiled in transitioning things from analog to digital. And I was so aware of things that needed to be done from a business perspective to shore up those companies. Again, I still didn't have really that syndrome, that imposter syndrome wasn't there. But when I got to Digital Domain, and now, I was the face of the company, and we were doing projects. I really felt like, I didn't really do Interview with the Vampire. That was Rob Legato. And I really didn't do, Titanic. That was Rob Legato and the men and women that worked around him. So when I would give talks, because again, I was the face and voice of the company, when I'd go and give talks, whether it was to the press or, lectures around the world, they treated me as if I was really important in the Titanic process, the biggest film at the time. And it was really uncomfortable for me because, I was just the face of the company and the business part of the company. I was not the creative part of the company.
Mm. Yeah, and I totally agree with what you said as well about why that really, the Rob Legatos should be on the big talk shows talking about the effects because people actually want to know about this and it's very popular and people do want to see the magic that goes on behind the scenes. So I totally agree with you on that as well. And yeah, quick appreciation, shout out to everyone watching. That you're all amazing. So we do in fact have some comments and some hopefully some questions. So I'm just on my phone. Sorry about this. It's not pulling through to the streaming platform. Right. So, hello, Saint. Hello, Anthony or Anthony. Um, Misha for Sculpt says, Who is Government? Written by Michael Lewis. Attempts to herald amazing stories about people in government. Cool. From Saint Walker. Hello, Saint. On the supply side, an issue is there are a few tentpole blockbuster movies as the audience seems so fragmented. Young people prefer YouTube, not MCU. Could this diversification become an opportunity for visual effects?
It could become an opportunity for visual effects. I think that, and we haven't really touched on it yet, the whole concept of AI and agentic AI and and whatnot. I think that is the sword of Damocles hanging over the head of visual effects. So we've suffered through business models. We've suffered through not being accepted and lauded within Hollywood. We'll never forget, the life of Pi and Westenhofer being sort of rushed off the stage while this company was going bankrupt, having won the Oscar for Life of Pi. So we've never, in the words of Rodney Dangerfield, we've never got no respect. And now, as visual effects are even more important because of international box office, visual effects have become the language of marketing for international audiences. Because let's face it, people in China or Japan or wherever are not going to be watching Driving Miss Daisy. So they're interested in visual effects, and they're interested, a lot of the viewers are young enough and hip enough to be able to really care about visual effects and how the magic is done, as you've said, Haley. But now we have like what's happening with artificial intelligence. And what we're seeing with artificial intelligence, and what I could see 2 or 3 years down the line, is that a lot of the visual effects workers wind up being replaced by agentic AI, and models that will allow average people to create fantastic looking images. And today, I get a lot of pushback. They'll say, "Well, today it's really difficult, and you have to do a lot of things." That's right. It is really difficult, but we're in its not even in its infancy stage. We're in its fetus stage, and it grows really quickly and really sort of geometrically, it winds up becoming more and more and more powerful, and the user interface will become easier and easier and easier. And so I think that's the real issue, even as it moves towards YouTube, because we've seen people really being interested in creating their own content, and most of it's
Mm,
garbage, but still, that's been with TikTok and the like, that's been sort of the current rage.
mm. Definitely in unprecedented times, it seems. So it's all a little bit up in the air. But I'm sure we'll have some other AI questions coming through. Thanks, Saint, for that question. We have a question from Dimitri. No, sorry, Alan. Hi, Alan. Alan Dimitri. If there would be one fundamental change to the business model or one mistake we're not addressing, what would it be? Thank you for sharing your insights and the opportunity. And now your book.
Hi, Alan. I think I've said it before. I'll say it again. I'll say it till I'm blue or green in the face, depending upon which movie you're watching. It's the fixed contract. We cannot allow for a fixed contract. We cannot allow to have the expense to go bid, and then we finish our bid, and now we're locked. If we are awarded the job, as I used to say, the good news is you got the job, the bad news is you got the job. um, the fixed contract concept is the death knell of the visual effects industry.
Um, just a quick note, if you're watching on LinkedIn, I can't see your comments for some reason. So please just drop me a message in to my personal message if you can. We've got David Corden. Hi, David.
Hey,
David
David.
was helping me try and set up this software platform yesterday.
David's a
Um,
prince of men.
uh, he has said that the fact majority of people couldn't understand how important you were for the success of the projects doesn't really make a difference. Appreciation is just a bonus, Scott. Chin up. um, okay, keep your questions coming in, everybody. It's good to see. And like I said, any LinkedIners, please just drop me a little message because I don't want to mess anything up. Bye. Hi, Rob. Hi, Rob Andrews. He has messaged me. Hopefully you can all see us well. We're going okay. So I'll go back to my questions quickly. Time is flying by.
Wow, 40 minutes in.
Yeah. So I'm sure writing this book brought up a lot of feelings, thoughts, ideas, even. And it's probably impossible to pick just one, but um,
But you're going to ask me to
what
do
would
that,
you?
aren't you?
I'm gonna, yeah.
I had that feeling.
What would you say um, was your all-time biggest high, career high, and biggest low whilst working in the VFX industry?
Well, there are a couple of highs. I guess Academy Awards are always a high, because it's really the industry, your coworkers or people that are supposedly sophisticated about film saying, um, you're the best. Your company is number one. So when I was at ILM, Industrial Light and Magic almost had like a nonstop record of winning Oscars. It was just I got there and they won more Oscars, and before I left, they won Oscars. They were the team, and I was always shocked when we would win because you know I'm I'm always looking for the glass being half empty. And so winning the Academy Awards for Inner Space and Who Framed Roger Rabbit and then The Abyss and then Terminator 2, and it was like a track record of we're going to win every year. Um, One of the years that we didn't win was for Total Recall. And so I was so upset and I was so competitive that I wound up hiring the guy who was the visual effects supervisor on Total Recall and brought him into ILM. I was like being like the New York Yankees, if you can't win, hire the guys that do win. And then when I went to Digital Domain, of course, I had a lot to prove. Most of my associates and friends at ILM said, "You'll never do it. You can't pull this off. We've had X number of years of experience." And so in our first year, we were nominated for True Lies. And of course, we lost to Forrest Gump, which was again an ILM project. But I felt like, wow, we've made it. And then we won for What Dreams May Come and Titanic. And so those moments were really the high points. It's when the industry says, your company, and the situation with Digital Domain was it was no longer ILM. It was now a new company that I had founded, won the Academy Award several times. Those were super highlights.
Mm.
Again, getting back to Academy Awards, I was positive we were going to win the Academy Award on Apollo 13 because the work was so fabulous. And I threw this giant party, as we always did. We were well known for our parties. And I had a whole bunch of champagne on ice because I thought we were going to win. And we lost to Babe. And I was
Great
just
movie.
shocked. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from
Yeah.
Rhythm and Hughes and Babe. It was pretty great. But it came down to that I think the Academy looked at the work that we did on Apollo 13 and couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't real. In fact, so
Mm.
much so that we premiered the film at the Houston Space Center, and we were asked, I'd never seen that footage before, and I asked the guy, well, what's your name? And he said, my name is Neil Armstrong. So even Neil Armstrong couldn't tell that this was not real. In fact, it was a model shot in our parking lot, right? But everybody knew pigs don't talk. And so that's another one of the reasons they won. But that was a really difficult night. I brought my then probably 10-year-old son to the Academy Awards party, and everybody was really hyped. And all of a sudden, the air went out of the room, and I told my assistant to send all of those cases of champagne to John Hughes at Rhythm and Hughes. And I looked over to my right, and my 10-year-old son was crying. And that was
No.
difficult. That was really difficult.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sad. Um, but yeah, speaking of Rhythm and Hues, if anyone, I'm sure everyone who's watching has, but if you haven't seen Life After Pi, it's a must watch. It's absolutely heartbreaking. So we have some more questions. We have one from Rob Andrews. How do you see the consolidation of studios and influence of the tech sector and its thinking via Netflix, etc., affecting movie output and thus VFX needs?
Yeah, I can see that in the not so distant future that the major studios are gobbled up by tech companies. We're seeing it, tech companies obviously are very involved in content and making content, whether it's Netflix or Apple or, folks like that. I think we'll continue to see that. I think that the studios, the traditional studios, would go the way of the horse as the car came on the scene. And I think, all we have to do is look at, in my opinion, look at what Jeffrey Katzenberg tried to do with QB, where he had a really great idea a little early of creating short pieces because people were consuming content in short pieces, and then linking them together and having a subscription basis. And it had a terrible failure. They lost billions of dollars, I believe. And part of the problem was, again, in my opinion, and I don't want to take anything away from Jeffrey Katzenberg because he was brilliant and is brilliant. But what he did was he took an old model, which was the studio model, which is what he grew up in and what he knew, and he applied that to short pieces. So, if you're going to get David Fincher involved in creating little shorts, those little shorts are going to cost a lot of money. And so the problem was is that he didn't realize the the privatization of many content folks, that they were looking to produce short films. And all we have to do is today look at China, and China has a burgeoning market of prosumer and younger folks that are making short films, and they're actually making money at it because they're not spending several $1 million on creating that short film in the way that Jeffrey Katzenberg did. So we shall see.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thanks, Rob, for your question. We have a question that's come through to my LinkedIn from Sarah. Uh, I'm currently reading your book and think it's an important read for current students of VFX and post-production. Have you got any advice for current and incoming VFX students? I'm currently a mature student of VFX and post-production.
Well, years ago, I came up with the concept of the term digital artist. And I did that to be able to sort of quantify salary ranges. So if you were a digital artist one, you got paid X. If you were a digital artist two, digital artist three, et cetera. My experience has been that the majority of the people working in visual effects are not artists. They're manufacturing people. There are, let's say 20 or 25% of the visual effects people are in fact artists, and they're secondary, at best, secondary creative people. I think those people will continue to be in demand, and those people will continue to make money. And so if you are actually a creative artist as opposed to a pixel pusher, you might have an opportunity in the future. If you're a pixel pusher, which I think a lot of folks need to look in the mirror and say, am I an artist or am I not? You're going to be replaced by artificial intelligence, in my opinion. So if I was to give advice to somebody, that was interested in entering the field, is given the tools that are available today to create content, I would, and the fact that there are not the gatekeepers that were the studios for so many years, I'd look to be a content creator, not a visual effects person. Maybe somebody who has skills in visual effects and understands how to use the new tools, but someone that creates content. And at the end, as they say, content is king.
Yeah, there's quite a few. They seem to be hundreds. I don't know how many, but a lot of content creators on YouTube who talk about VFX and recreating VFX. I watched one yesterday. Someone recreated a scene from Avatar just using their laptop, which looked pretty amazing. But some of these creators are getting hundreds of thousands of views. I mean, I don't think streaming pays very much, but I guess sponsors and that sort of thing would do quite nicely. Um, just a quick reminder for anyone on LinkedIn. I can't see your questions for some reason, so please drop me a personal LinkedIn message if you have any questions for Scott. Um, YouTube is working fine, and we do have another question from YouTube. Anthony, I know it's either Anthony or Anthony. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing. Um, do you think the VES in the USA should be doing more to help the industry, or are they okay to stay as an honorific society? I personally think they should be doing more to help.
Well, in fact, I'm probably the poster boy of what the hell is going on with the VES. To use a Titanic analogy, the ship is sinking, people are drowning, and you're throwing fucking, pardon me, you're throwing parties. So get your act together and understand what it is you need to do. There have been some people, and I don't know if this is true, so I'm careful about supporting it. There are some people that said that they believe that the VES has actually been helped, and there has been money and funding and sponsorship that's come from the motion picture studios, because the last thing the motion picture studio wants is a trade association, or the last thing they want is to end this incredibly one-sided prospect for bidding, where now visual effects companies act like production companies and they get paid for time and materials and markup. So I think the VES is in the position, and I know it's against their charter and all of that stuff. Well, change the damn charter. It's like you can't stand on process while people are losing their jobs. You need to be proactive and say we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And they have the platform to be able to do that, and I don't understand why they don't. Now, to add to that, because I've been so vocal about the VES sort of not standing up and doing the right thing, I've also been blackballed by the VES. So the VES, not that I need their gold seal of approval, but I look at the things that the VES does, and the VES honors people that have significantly less impact on the industry than yours truly. So they're not interested in honoring Scott Ross because Scott Ross has been in their face for the last 20 years. And I'll continue to be in their face because I do believe it's the best existing platform to do what's needed. And the time to do that is now.
Mm, thank you for that. Yeah, it's just we've got more questions coming in, but yeah, with World VFX Day, I really wanted it to be a platform that was very open and it had lots of open discussions. So I can see the sort of complications that can arise when you have both VFX studios and client side as well. I mean, I've had clients client side speak at World VFX Day, which is fantastic. I love more. But we want obviously to have these open and honest conversations as well. So it's a tricky tight uh, tightrope, I guess, but kind of shouldn't be at the same time, because it's yeah fundamental for our industry to make some changes. So just wanted to put that out there. VES actually, the German section, I think they're having a talk tomorrow discussing the business model. Don't know
Hmm.
if you've seen that.
I have
I just
not.
saw that
No.
today. It's only open to members, unfortunately. So, if anyone can get me in, let me know because I'd love to listen to that talk. But yeah, it's a tough one. So we have one from VFX Talks. What do you think the next few years in the industry will look like? Will the space left by Technicolor be filled by smaller studios, or is there no need for that many VFX artists anymore?
Well, in the short term, there's still, a need for visual effects artists and visual effects workers, without a doubt. I believe that in the longer term, the studios, I wrote something and let me, I can, don't know if I could find it, but I had a conversation with somebody the other day who had on LinkedIn had asked me something. And I said, you need to look at the fact that number one, the, the studios and the clients are all looking for a deal. They all want the cost to be less. And, understandably so. They're in business. They want things to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And and even given the existing business model, they feel that it's too expensive. Like my ex-partner Jim Cameron came out with a statement and said that if the movies that he wants to make and the movies that he likes to watch continue to be made, that the cost of making those movies have to come down considerably. says the man who spends $250 million on making a movie. Um, but what he goes on further is he says that the problem is the cost of visual effects. So if you're making the kinds of movies that Jim wants to make, visual effects are way too expensive. And his solution to that, which is why he said he joined Stability AI, was to understand the concepts and software capabilities and motives and directions of an artificial intelligence company, which he then says could then lower the cost of visual effects by 50%. What he didn't say, which is how is he going to lower the cost of visual effects by 50%? Now, he sort of alluded to the fact that because AI is much quicker in making iterations, that the ability to get to a final on a shot would be cut considerably, and therefore the cost would go down. I call that bullshit because the fact of the matter is that the iterations and process and problems really are the problem of the director. And let's assume for a second that Jim is right, and it will make the workflow much more efficient and therefore wind up doing the work in 50% less time. What is the visual effects worker going to do when that 50% time is now cut? And where is he going to get another job or she going to get another job? So I think it's disingenuous that he says that because really, if you look at the history and you understand sort of the processes that have happened in the past, the real hit's going to be AI is going to make things a lot faster and quicker, and therefore, i.e., we don't need all these damn visual effects workers, or as Jim Cameron once called them, idiot savants. We don't need these people because that's what's going to cut the cost. So it upsets me.
Yeah, yeah. Um, oh, it's a lot. We will get to a positive question soon. But as you were talking about that, I do have a question kind of around that, and we've kind of covered it a little bit. But just talking, thinking about the artists, one of the things that really sort of has broken my heart from working from the marketing side of things is when we would have screenings and we'd wait for the credits to roll, waiting for our names to come up, not mine, but the artists' names. And usually we'd only get a few, and it would be towards the end. Um, it's been a problem for a while, but just thinking about lack of credits, being cut off mid-speech at the Oscars, and so many articles on no CGI, that's being touted by directors, showrunners, even actors. Why do you think VFX typically feels so low down in the food chain in filmmaking? Do you think it's a lack of understanding or
Nah.
something else?
Um, I grew up on the streets of Queens in New York. It was a pretty rough and tumble time. And I realized that if you don't stand up to bullies, you will be continued to be bullied. And so, because no one stands up and says, we're not doing this, this is not happening. We are the visual effects facility, and when we contract to do the work, A, we're not going to be on a fixed budget. B, we want our credits, and we want them at least before the greensmen and the catering people. Um, and um, and unless you do that, unless you stand up to the bullies, nothing's going to change. Now the problem is that back in the day when I was at ILM, I stood up to the bullies. And it was easy for me to do because we were a market leader and controlled the majority of the visual effects work happening in Hollywood. And so they really didn't have a choice to go anywhere else really than Industrial Light and Magic. I remember one time on The Rocketeer, I was told by Disney's head of production at the time that they would not pay for plate photography. We used to have to shoot plates on VistaVision film. That they would not pay for plate photography, and the ILM camera crew and plate crew and our VistaVision camera couldn't be on set, that they would do it themselves. And so I said, to the fellow at the time, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Bruce, but then we're gonna pass. And I got up and I was, on the lot in Burbank and I'm walking down the hall and he literally came screaming after me, wait, 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 you can have your guys, we'll do it. Because I stood up to the bullies. I could stand up to those issues at ILM because of what the market was at that time. But today, I don't think any visual effects company has the capability or the position to stand up to the folks at a studio and say, no, these are what our credits are going to be. This is where it's how we're going to get paid. And if you want to work with us, this is the way it is. And so as a result, we need a trade association because the trade association will speak for the 500 facilities that are out there. None of the actual facilities would have to have a heart to heart, difficult conversation with the head of a motion picture studio. And the Visual Effects Trade Association could have that conversation and they could be powerful and aggressive and fair and stand up for what's right without putting any one of the facilities in jeopardy and having them being blackballed.
Mm. Ah, well, I've got a few more questions. So anyone watching, please get your questions over in the next 5 minutes. And again, if you're on LinkedIn, please send me a personal message or join us over on YouTube. So on to we've talked a lot about a lot of negative sides of VFX. What are some of the positive things you've seen lately, and why do you choose to still work in the industry today?
Well, I'm not really working in the industry. I sold digital domain in 2006. So what's that? 19 years. So for 19 years, I'm not working. I'm not, I do lectures and I sit on boards and I do some consulting, but it's not like I have a real job. I do it because if you read my book, I've always been a person who wants to stand up against the things that are wrong. If I see something
Mm,
that's right and I see people being taken advantage of for doing the right thing by people that are doing the wrong thing, I'm always that person or that group's champion. So I do it because, I live a pretty decent life. I live in Santa Barbara. My kids are grown. I have a great wife. I have a good life.
yeah,
And it was a lot of that was because of the visual effects industry. So I
yeah,
feel like I need to give back. So that's why I
yeah.
continue to do it. The positive things, well, the work is getting better and better and better and better. It's mind blowing. I think we've seen things that Cameron and I talked about when we first formed Digital Domain, which was we had this desire to be able to have the visual effects artists and workers have direct interaction with the director because we thought that would make things considerably more efficient. Unfortunately,
Mm,
it didn't work out because on a major Hollywood blockbuster, the director is oftentimes much too busy in production to deal with visual effects, and then much too busy in editorial and sound to deal with visual effects in post. But I saw, I guess it was 2 years ago, where this Japanese visual effects company wound up winning the Academy Award. Again, I get back to the Academy Award on Godzilla Minus One. And the work was pretty spectacular, but it was a very small team. And the reason it was a very small team is because the director was the visual effects supervisor and was very fluent in visual effects. So that gave me hope that things could change. I'm not sure Hollywood is capable of changing, but I think that we're going to see other things happen where directors are going to be visual effects supervisors and vice versa.
mm. Nice, thank you. So coming back to your book, how long did it take you, by the way, to write?
I didn't answer your question about why I was told the personal story as well. So I wound up reading. I'm sort of a political nut. I'm absolutely disgusted by the political environment here in the United States. I've always been a progressive, and I find that what's happening in the White House and around Trumpism is just awful. And so I read this book by a woman named Cassidy Hutchinson, and the name of the book was Enough, and it was a biography, autobiography, of her time in the White House and her time with her boss, Mark Meadows, who was right in there, and so she was an assistant to the top guy in the White House besides the president, and I wanted to know what was going on. And I found out that I was much more interested in how this very bright East Coast young woman, educated, wound up being a Trumper. And it was more of her personal story and her relationship with her father and her relationship with her mother, etc., that sort of captured my interest much more than a conversation she might have had with her boss about Trump. And so when I decided to write my book, I thought that my personal story would be more interesting than just another business book or another technical book about visual effects. And as you said earlier, I was dissuaded by multiple publishers not to do that. They said nobody really cares. They're not going to be really interested in it. Your last name isn't Obama. No one's going to buy it. They were partly right. Very few people have bought it, but I'm much more proud of the book than and the feedback that I'm getting from people like yourself, Haley, saying that they found that the personal story really added a great deal to the journey that was also business and issues around our industry. So I answered that question a little late. The second part
Yeah,
of your
no,
question
thank you.
was what? Say it again.
I was just segueing into my other question, which was how long
Oh,
did it
how long
take
did it
you
take?
to write?
Well, at first, when I started to write it, I've been writing a blog for a number of years, and it has gone back and forth from, what was happening at Lucasfilm and ILM and then Digital Domain, and then it transitioned into because I didn't have very many good stories to tell my career in the music industry and being sort of 20 feet from stardom, whether it was Jimi Hendrix or Johnny Winter or the Beatles or whatever. And so I had a lot of that written. And then when I decided to write the book, I read Catmull's book, Creativity Incorporated, and I recognized that he had a ghostwriter. So I thought, maybe what I need is I need a ghostwriter. I spoke to a couple of friends, and one guy said, well, my wife is a ghostwriter and she's great. And I had a brief conversation with her, and as life will sort of deal you the deck of cards, I just said, yeah, sounds great. Yeah, Joanne, you're the person. Now, I didn't read any of her writing or anything. And so I would get on the phone with Joanne maybe 3 times a week, 2 hours at a crack. And we would take some of the writings that I did on my blog and some of the stories that I would tell her. And then she would write and I would review it. And then I would make changes. And then we'd have a locked chapter. I'd say it was about a year and a half in the making.
Hmm. Oh, it's not bad.
No?
Seems like a good amount of time. Is there anything now that it's published? I know you can probably do revisions or something like that, but is there anything since it's been published that you wish you'd included? Or is there anything that
I
you
w-
took out?
well, I wished I had had another chapter on artificial intelligence because I've become much more involved in it and understanding of it, um, and I think that's a critical issue for the industry. So I wish I would have had that time and understood it more and spent a chapter or two on artificial intelligence. Things that I would have added to it. There were lots of personal stories of, and I had to be careful, because I don't want to get sued. There are people that are litigious and that are billionaires that are in this story. And the last thing I want to do is wind up getting sued, even though everything that I put in that book is the truth. In America, at least, you can get sued for anything. And as we've seen, if you have somebody has enough money and enough legal resources, you could wind up, you know, in litigation, and it'll cost you a fortune to be able to deal with it. And I don't have that kind of money, so I was careful about that. I was also careful of not, there are sort of four antagonists in my book. The first one is Bob Dellendorf, who is the guy who taught me business in ILM. I mean, at One Pass. And I think, pretty complimentary to Dellendorf because I learned a lot from him. But he was also, we were like oil and water. He was at the time, probably a 55-year-old business guy. I was a 30-year-old lefty musician, radical, and the two of us just didn't see eye to eye, but I learned a lot. Then the next one was Norby, who was the president of Lucasfilm, and I despised him. He was just awful, and I think it comes across in the book just how he missed the boat, and ultimately how unfortunately I was treated by George and his lawyers when I left Lucasfilm because I really thought I had the opportunity and the capability and had the support of the employees once Norby was fired that I could take over the company, but that was not to be. And then the next protagonist would be Jim Cameron. And then finally, the last one would be John Texter, the guy who winds up buying Digital Domain and is, whew, I don't even want to get into it. But I tried to be able to tell my readership that even in those situations of just wanting to rip the hair out of your head and feeling like all is lost, that in retrospect and looking in the rearview mirror, I learned a lot from each one of those people, and I got great value in my relationship with them, however horrible and painful it was at the time. In retrospect, I wouldn't be where I am today, and I wouldn't have had the experiences that I had. A lower blue collar kid from the Bronx and Queens in New York to have lived the life that I've lived. A lot of that had to do with those four guys.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. Yeah, I think there's something to be said about kind of growing up a certain way that gives you that edge. And the title of your book is obviously Upstart. I like to think that I'm a little bit of an upstart as well. So I think that's why I've resonated with your book so much too. We're gonna have to wrap up soon. I'll let you get on with your day, but we have a couple more questions, if I may.
Please. Sure.
We've got one from Saint again. Um, who would play you in the film of the book? And would you get yourself de-aged Laton Hanks? A la Tom
Saint, you
Hanks, I think that's.
wacky, wacky dude, you. Well, of course, who
I
would get
love
to
you,
play
Saint.
me? It would have to be, Brad Pitt, of course. It's or who, Timothy Chalamet. That's my wife's new heartthrob. So I don't know. That's a silly question, Saint.
I love it. I
Next,
love it.
next.
Um, Hi Lee S. Uh, I've seen some chatter online about trying to get the US administration's tariff policies to bring more film work in general and specifically VFX back to the US. Do you think this is at all likely?
I haven't seen that. I've seen a little bit of press of Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who said that he is looking at increasing the subsidies and tax breaks for film because there's been a lot of press about the fact that the film industry is no longer really Hollywood and that the film industry is now international. And I think the governor of California recognizes that one of the main industries and draws of his state um, and my state that I live in is the film industry. So he's looking at increasing subsidies and being competitive. Now, I think he's going about it the wrong way because what subsidies have been, in my opinion, is nothing more than corporate socialism. So you have these multi-billion dollar companies that are international companies, and they're winding up giving tax breaks and subsidies to those companies to get them to shoot in their locales. But as a visual effects facility owner, to open up another visual effects facility in London or to open up one in Vancouver or now in Pune costs a great deal of money. And then when we open that facility up, we have to bring people from sort of the mothership, as it were, to those countries to be able to help and train and put the pipeline in place. And so that's really expensive. And now you're uprooting families in the process of it. And then at the end of the day, the subsidies are only going to the studios, to the motion picture studios. They're not coming to the visual effects facilities. And in fact, the visual effects facilities now have to aggressively bid and competitively bid just like they did back in California or wherever they were located, but now their expenses are even higher. So it's a double negative, pardon the pun. It's a double negative for having subsidies and whatnot. And so, if I look to Britain, and I used to say this, maybe King Charles and the folks that are in Britain should be giving subsidies to British filmmakers. To Wallace and Gromit should be getting subsidized, and British visual effects facilities. But the thought of giving ginormous tax credits and subsidies to Lucasfilm and to 20th Century Fox or to, Jim Cameron in New Zealand, I just find that just abhorrent.
Thank you. Hope that answers your question, Lee. We are coming up to the end, but I wanted to ask back to the book, and I'm sorry I can't share the link in the chat because it doesn't seem to be working, but you'll find it top of the page. Scott Ross, Upstart. It's on Amazon and audiobook, which
Audible,
is
yeah,
audiobook
Audible.
on Audible, which is fantastic. Glad that that came out. That was quite recent, wasn't it? A recent
It
edition.
was. Yep.
Um, was it quite a cathartic experience for you, just thinking back? I'm sure it brought up a lot of memories, good and bad, but overall, are you quite happy with this legacy that you've left and are leaving and still building
I'm
in a
happy
way?
with the book. That's for sure. Again, I wish more people would read it or could read it. I think it should be important reading for anybody who's in any creative, technical video games, whatnot, whether you're a student or whether you're a practitioner or whether you're a senior person, anybody that is involved with or wants to be involved with creative, technical companies. I think it's a really good read, and I think it's an important read. Am I happy with my legacy? I'll tell you a funny story. We could end it with that. So maybe a year into being at Digital Domain, I wound up getting a phone call. My assistant said to me, Scott, Jeffrey Katzenberg would like to meet with you tomorrow at 7. And I thought, wow, okay, I got to drive over to Universal because that's where the DreamWorks offices are now. They hadn't moved. And, traffic's going to be brutal at 5 in the afternoon. She said, no, no, 7 in the morning. I said, 7 in the morning? Well, I got to get up at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. I drive over to Universal to meet with Jeffrey Katzenberg at 7 in the morning. She said, yep, he wants to meet with you. I said, okay, you don't turn Jeffrey Katzenberg down. So I got in the car and I drive there and I get to Universal and I walk through the halls and I run into Mo Ostin. And Mo Ostin was like one of the top A&R record executives of when I was like totally involved in music. He worked with every major act, Aretha. I mean, he was the guy. And Mo Ostin was there at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I had never met Mo Ostin. I always wanted to, but how would I ever meet him? And he walks right over to me and he puts his hand out and he shakes my hand and he says, Scott Ross, I've heard so much about you. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a plant because there's no way that Mo Ostin has heard about me. We sit down with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Jeffrey starts talking about the fact that he wants to offer me a job to run DreamWorks Interactive. And I explained to him that, I've got this company and shareholders and employees, and no, I'm not going to take the job. And he said, well, what do you want your legacy to be? And I said, no, he said, what do you want from life? And I said, well, my mother died when I was about 21 years old, and my kids don't know her, but by the next generation, no one will know who my mother was, and she was really important to me. And so I'd like my life to be worthwhile. And I'd like to, you don't have to know my name, but that I'm here on this earth, and being here on this earth, I would like to have made an impact of positive impact of some sort. And he said, "Oh, that's basically legacy stuff." And I said, "Not really, because I don't care if they know my name." He said, "Well, let me tell you, when I was at Disney, all they ever cared about was legacy. That was legacy, legacy, legacy." And he said, and I finally came to realize that when I saw something the other night, how ridiculous Legacy was. And I thought he was going to say he was reading Sartre or Camus or something heady like that. And I took a sip of orange juice, and he said, "No, I was watching Star Trek, and I heard Captain Kirk." And as soon as he said Star Trek, for some reason, because I thought Jeffrey Katzenberg was going to talk about, the great minds of the world, he was using an analogy from a science fiction movie. And I did a spit take, and I blew the orange juice all over the table. I felt so stupid and so bad. And I thought to myself, I never, ever, ever want to think about legacy. That's just because it's not the way you need to think about your life. The way you need to think about your life is when you were put here on this planet, however it was, that you did the best to be able to make people happy and give them jobs and let them build families, um, and that the work that you did made a difference to people's lives, from making them joyful or happy, or teaching them something. And so I guess if that's my legacy, I'm still on the path of creating it.
Love that. Thank you so much.
You're
That
welcome.
that was a perfect ending. Thank you. Thank you to everyone watching. Was there anything else that you wanted to say before we go?
No, I if I was to leave on a positive note, the positive note is that as we've seen technology become more and more democratized, and as we've seen the opportunity to create content that is of high production value, I think there's a great opportunity for creative people to create content without the roadblocks that so many of us had in our lives. You don't have to, like, a music industry is a perfect example of that. You don't have to tour with a band, and you don't have to give your life away to the record company. You can actually record a great sounding record in your home, and you could put it on Spotify. You can get a following. You're going to have to work hard, but you get to do it, as opposed to handing over your future, your art, your creativity to a studio that there's whose only interest is profit. And so the fact that that technology now exists and is continuing to grow by leaps and bounds, rock your creative juices.
Yeah, that's very well put. Thank you. It's definitely going to be some interesting years ahead, that's for sure.
That's for
Um,
sure.
can anyone meet you anywhere this year? Are you going to go to any events? I know we tried to get to you to FMX, but it was a little bit late.
It was, let's see, I haven't been to NAB since like 1984. The last time I was at FMX was probably in 2002. I'm waiting to hear about SIGGRAPH in Vancouver. I wanted to do a talk about what we just talked about to an audience and take questions, sort of like the Actors Studio, where I could have somebody who's, very well versed in the industry. And I was thinking somebody like Terence Masson, who's an educator, and sit there and ask me questions like you've done, and do it in front of a SIGGRAPH audience. And I'm still waiting to hear back from SIGGRAPH, which is the middle part of August, and it's coming up. And if they say yes, I will be there with bells on.
Amazing. Well, I hope that happens because it's definitely an important message to be putting out there. And I'm sure everyone appreciates everything that you've done. The book has just, yeah, it's just ticked a lot of boxes for me and things that I've been thinking over the years. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight or today, wherever you are. Um, Scott, you're a gem. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks,
We're
Haley.
gonna stick around offline, but bye to everyone else watching. Thank you.